After the credits of Fire Emblem Rekka no Ken, players got their first glimpse at an aged Eliwood and Hector, as well as the red-headed lad known as Roy and his childhood friend, Lilina. Many players assumed that the sword fighter from Melee would be the next to have his story told. Their guesses were way off, as not only would players bid farewell to the land of Elib and its heroes, but they would say hello to the only game in the series that has no relation to any other title. Fire Emblem Seima no Okazaki was first announced on June 14, 2004, set for a winter release that same year in Japan. Sachiko Wada, the designer for Fire Emblem Foi no Tsurugi and Rekka no Ken, continued to lead Intelligent Systems as the game's lead designer. Directing was shared among 3 people: Toru Narihiro, Kentaro Nishimura, and Hitoshi Yamagami. The score was composed by Yoshihiko Kitamura, the first time the series had ever changed composers. Longtime series composer Yuka Sugioka had quit her full-time job in Intelligent Systems at the time, now working as a part-time employee, though Sugioka was still involved in the compositions under her new position as sound supervisor. Fire Emblem Seima no Okazaki was released on October 7, 2004 in Japan, and in North America on May 23, 2005 under the name Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. The story had no connection to any other title up to that point, and to date remains unrelated to any other releases. In ancient time, monsters and demons alike dominated humanity, wreaking havoc upon the land of Magvale. In these dark times, the people prayed to the heavens for a solution, and from its light there came the Sacred Stones. The power of the Sacred Stone was used by the hero Grado and his allies to defeat the Demon King and seal away his soul within Grado's stone. The Sacred Stones became the founding pieces for the 5 nations of Magvale: Renee, Frelia, Roston, Shahana, and Grado, with the merchant territory of Carcino forming at a later time and without a sacred stone to its name. Set 8 centuries after the events of what would be known as the War of the Stones, the Emperor of Grado, Vagarda, made a shocking decision to invade the longtime allied nation of Renee. The territories of Renee quickly fell from the sudden attack, and worse yet, King Fado's son, Ephraim, had gone missing on the battlefield. With little resistance between the army of Grado and Renee's capital, King Fado resorts to staying behind while his daughter Erica and a handful of knights flee to Frelia. For the first 9 chapters, Erica set out to save her brother from the front lines of Grado's forces. Afterwards, a new journey would open up, and the plot would either focus on Erica venturing to Johanna for their allegiance, or Ephraim and his attack on the Grado capital. The story was considerably shorter than Fire Emblem, with around 22 chapters, but it also had several chapters that were unique to each of the twin lords. Later sections would have different dialogue depending on the twin, but for the most part, events in the story stayed the same, as did the true motive with the nefarious puppet master, the Demon King, and his human shell, Lion. Lion was first shown in a flashback after Erica and Ephraim were reunited. Depending on the player's choice twin, he was either seen as the same kind-hearted companion in Erica's chapters or as a ruthless murderer in Ephraim's. When their paths finally intertwined, all the pieces came together. After seeing an earthquake that would destroy Grado, the soft-hearted son of the Emperor began searching for a way to stop his people from suffering. His research led to experimenting with the power of Grado's Sacred Stone. This title's Fire Emblem. After using its magic to heal a burnt girl, the Necromancer began to experiment more with the power of the Sacred Stone, unaware of the soul of the Demon King, Pamortes, trapped within it. Lion's research on the Sacred Stone, however, became more desperate as his father fell ill and eventually passed away. He succeeded in bringing his father back to motion after separating the Fire Emblem into a Sacred Stone and the powerful Dark Stone, though his father's body at that point was nothing more than a shell, just as the Demon King had made Lion's body his own, leaving only a part of his consciousness there for him to see his desires, to defeat Ephraim and take Erica as his own. Depending on the lord the player chose in a new journey, the tragic Prince Lion would either admit he admired Ephraim's strength in his final moments, or the feelings he had for Erica. Though the story was on a smaller scale, there were still plenty of enemies and this time, monsters to defeat. Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones was essentially Fire Emblem Gaiden 2, with mechanics built upon from the two previous ventures on the Game Boy Advance. Unlike Fire Emblem, which brought you from one mission to the next, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones let you roam around on the map through clear towns and areas in between battles to buy supplies, weapons, or encounter some enemies. New non-human creatures were added into the Rogues Gallery for the second time in the series and would occasionally fight the twins on their adventures. Often creatures could be fought on the world map with encounters for more gold and sometimes weapons. Locations like the Valney Tower and Lagda Ruins let players test their skills on the field against these new dreaded foes, and a new feature known as the Creature Campaign allowed players to fight with several previously non-playable characters such as King Fado and Lion himself after multiple playthroughs. As for the characters, units could now choose between branching classes, allowing for a more flexible team. In addition, some units were granted skills upon promotion, a feature that returned from Seisonal Keifu. Sniper's incredible accuracy granted them the Sure Strike skill, while the General's Great Shield made the highly defensive unit impossible to damage. New classes were added in, including the Great Knight, Mage Knight, Wyvern Rider, and Trainee classes. Trainees were a tier behind the regular classes. At level 10, players could choose to upgrade to either one of two regular unit types, or, if certain conditions were met on a second playthrough, they could choose to become Super Trainees with special skills, both of which were accomplished without the use of any class item. Aside from these minor additions, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stone stuck to the grid that Fire Emblem had laid out before it. Enemies needed to be routed and heroes needed to approach each battle carefully, lest it be their last. Fire Emblem The Sacred Stone once again earned the series grand amounts of praise for its character development and plot. As a sequel to Fire Emblem, however, critics and gamers alike noted that it only made minor changes to what the Blazing Sword had done 2 years before it, resulting in a title that was considered more of the same. What changes that were taken note of were those that removed much of the challenge and strategy behind the game, making the game much less difficult than its predecessor. Many also complained that the campaign was much shorter than its predecessor, and with the character count falling from 44 in Fire Emblem to 33, the game felt lacking in the cast department. However, this shorter title and team of companions could be due to the fact that another Fire Emblem game was in development before Sacred Stones was even announced. With 2 Fire Emblem titles in the works and the GameCube struggling in sales, it would make sense that Intelligent Systems focused their efforts on saving the Purple Lunchbox over the wildly successful Game Boy Advance. Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones is the most balanced in the series, reaching back in the past for changes, but keeping things familiar with its handheld predecessors. Fire Emblem The Sacred Stone sold around 420,000 copies in North America and 890,000 worldwide, slightly less than Fire Emblem Reckono Ken before it. Despite its lack of originality, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones continued the high standards set by its masterful predecessor. Come back next week as we take a look at Fire Emblem's debut in the Third Dimension. A cancelled N64 title, a girl in a forest, and a new race leads to prejudice and conflict.
This is the title that I probably would agree with critics the most on, and the one that I have the least amount to say about. It's a great title, but it's just not as good as Fire Emblem Reckono Ken. There are a lot of good things in this title, don't get me wrong. The villain is fantastic. He is among the top 5 tragic villains out there. But the story doesn't feel as important and as grand as it should be. Maybe that's because there's less to actually explore, and because there's a world map which just makes it feel even more tighter. But there's also a smaller cast, and you just don't care as much for these characters as you did with Reckono Ken, or the next Fire Emblem game, which we'll be getting to next week. And I'm not saying that having a smaller cast automatically makes it worse. I'm just saying that these characters didn't feel as fleshed out as they could have been. Speaking of unfulfilled potential, the class changes with skills could have been a great addition, but unfortunately, they feel kind of useless in the long run. Bringing back the map system from Gaiden would have been a neat nostalgic idea, but unfortunately, it also makes this game much more flawed than it could have been. It makes the game way too easy. You can just grind all you want, get more cash, items, and takes out the challenge that the Fire Emblem series is known for. This is by far the easiest game in the series, so if you're a newcomer, it's probably the best choice for you. Lastly, let's talk about the soundtrack. Now, most of the Fire Emblem games were composed by Yuka Tsujioko, and this is the only game in the series that does not have her composing the music. That being said, the soundtrack has its highlights and it has some wonderful, truly beautiful songs, but like the rest of the game, it's just not as good as the game that came before it or the game that came after it. And that's how you can summarize this game. It's a great entry, but it's just not as good as the Fire Emblem that preceded it or succeeded it. If you're looking to start off in the Fire Emblem series, this is the entry that I suggest you try first. While it's certainly shorter and not as good as Rekka no Ken, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones is still a wholly good experience and a great entry in the Fire Emblem series. Check it out.